Welcome to Life Beneath. I've been wanting to make this for 7 years. I've been trying to understand why my life has taken such a different turn than I thought it would. 7 years ago, I sold a software company. For about a year, I was in this euphoria, and I felt like I've done it. I finally made myself safe. I had an 8-figure exit. I couldn't believe that the thing I had built with my team and my co-founder had a price tag put on it, that I was worth something, that my company was worth something, my work was worth something. I felt like I've made it. This dream that I imagined when I was 15 years old, when the police came to my childhood home and evicted my family. And then I spent the next 2 or 3 years after that wandering around, bouncing from house to house. Since that night, when I turned 15, the fire in my belly had been so strong, and I was just gonna go out and do it. I was not gonna let my life end up like my parents' life, which was disintegrating. I got this huge win, and my life began to fall apart. Right at that moment. That was this apex. And from that point, I got an autoimmune disease. And I started to get tired. I had chronic fatigue. I couldn't digest. I had nausea. My appetite went away. I started losing weight. I began to have chest pains. I could feel my heart just beating like crazy for no reason. I would get up in the middle of the night. I was pushing so hard. I was doing triathlons. I was running a company. I was doing trail races. I was going for it. I was wrestling with life. And that's how I knew how to live. And then 7 years ago, my body just said, no more. We're done here. So that's the first thing that happened to me when my life started falling apart 7 years ago, is my body gave out. The second thing that happened to me is my motivation left. I remember sitting in this conference room at Zendesk, the company that acquired my software company. And this is maybe a year after the acquisition. And I still had this feeling like, oh, I'm somebody, I'm the founder whose company got acquired. There's maybe 10, 12 other people sitting around this conference room, and we're all talking about launching this new product. And I feel this incredible frustration, bordering on rage, coming up inside me of, what are we doing here? This doesn't matter. And I was so tired. I went from having such drive, such a feeling like, we're gonna make this thing happen. My motivation just crumbled away. And I remember I sat there at the end of the meeting, everyone else left. And there was this other woman who ran communications who was there. And I turned to her and I just said, everyone here is dead inside. And she said, maybe you were dead inside. And I was. And it was hard for me. That's what happens, is we often project what we feel out into the world and say, oh, the world's like this. So it makes me feel dead inside. But I felt dead inside. And it was terrifying because I had a hope that I would regain my health. But the motivation is the thing that lived underneath my health, that drove me to achieve, to solve problems in the first place, to go after it, to take life by the horns. And I just didn't want to anymore. I had money, I had time, but my motivation was gone. And I thought about leaving modern life entirely. I started sitting long meditation retreats, and I thought about shaving my head, moving to Thailand, becoming a monk, or just getting a cabin somewhere and saying, fuck all this. I don't want anything to do with it anymore. I couldn't ever imagine working again. The thought of it, the feeling of it, I want to throw up in my mouth. I projected it all out. I was like, oh, capitalism is terrible, which there are many things that are wrong with capitalism. But I was like, it's the capitalist system. It's tech. I developed this allergic reaction to technology. I went off of all social media. I want nothing to do with this. And I had just built this very deep technical product, marketing automation software. And I was like, oh my God, my product might have ruined the world. So the first thing is that I lost my health. The second thing is that I lost my motivation. The third thing that happened to me is that I lost my relationships. I went through a divorce. I had to be alone. I just had this overwhelming feeling of claustrophobia. It was really hard because I had developed myself into this idea, this role as a person who could work any room. That was so important to me. Like, I'm the person who's figured out sales. I can work any room. I can win anyone over. This is a skill I've been working on ever since I was a teenager. I can win people over. I can figure out a problem. You give me a problem, I'll break it down and I'll figure it out. I didn't have the motivation to break problems down and figure them out. And I didn't have the desire to engage socially. And I felt my friendships, my marriage, and a lot of other relationships just slipping away. And all I wanted to do was be alone. So I moved to a cabin outside Boulder, Colorado, in Chautauqua Park, looking up at the Flatiron. And for more than a year, I stayed in that cabin and I was a hermit. I meditated, I read poetry, I wrote, and every morning as my life is falling apart, I would start writing and I would start crying. And I would just cry and cry all these tears into my oatmeal. I made oatmeal and blueberries every morning. And I'd just be like putting this in my mouth, crying into my oatmeal, crying onto my journal. And I don't think I'd cried in 10 years before that. I just didn't have time for it. I thought, who's this gonna help? That doesn't solve any problems. So I didn't cry until all of this started happening. Oscar Wilde has this amazing quote that sums up the problem that I was facing. There are only two tragedies in life. The first tragedy is not getting what you want. And we know all about that tragedy. Like, what is America about? The pursuit of happiness. It's baked into our Declaration of Independence, and there's nothing I love more than being independent. I will go off and I will make it happen. I was number one in line on that agenda. So the first tragedy, not getting what I want. And I knew how to deal with it. Go after it harder. I didn't get into Oxford. I was like, fuck that, I'm gonna get into Oxford. Spent 2 years, finally did get into Oxford, studying, working my ass off. Didn't get into Y Combinator, I'm gonna get into Y Combinator. Company's gonna go under, I'm gonna make this work. Me and my co-founder made it happen. Like, we worked balls to the wall. I was up at 3 a.m. many nights. I did the whole crazy VC ride where we just poured ourselves into this company. So I knew how to go after what I wanted. And if I didn't get it, well, that just tells me exactly what I have to do. Okay, so Oscar Wilde's quote, there's two great tragedies in life. The first is not getting what you want. The second is getting what you want. And that I was completely unprepared for. We know how to redouble our efforts, particularly us men. This is what we are taught to do. Go after it. Stare the monster, the dragon, the fear, the problem. Stare it in the face, plant yourself, and charge. Come at me, bro. What do? We've gotten it. We're holding it in our hands. I'm holding this success in my hands that I have worked since I was 15 years old to get. Every waking moment, I drive myself to get there. I can't feel it. I cannot feel it. So my life is perfect on paper. I've achieved everything beyond what I thought I could achieve. I'm there. I've got it. I finally have fuck you money. I finally can create my own destiny. And I can't enjoy it. How many times have we heard this story? This is the oldest story. How many Hollywood stars have melted down because they don't know what to do with what they have? The reason that Oscar Wilde's second tragedy is a tragedy is because there's nowhere to go. It's terrifying. And that is why I got sick. That's why my motivation dried up. That's why my relationships dried up. They didn't have any meaning. Human beings, we run on meaning. And if you take that meaning away, and for me, the meaning was the fight. It was the struggle. Life is just gonna creep up behind you. You wake up, you're gonna go to school, you're a normal kid, and then it's gonna kick you out of your house. And then your family's gonna disintegrate, and then your parents will separate, and then you'll have to figure everything out for yourself. So my meaning was, no, it won't. I will get above it and I will beat it. And then I created the situation that I thought would do that, and it is so terrifying to be holding it in your hands and have nowhere to go and nothing to do and nowhere to turn. If I build another company and I sell it for $100 million this time, the problem is going to be worse. I'm going to feel worse. That was abundantly clear. And many people, I don't know how, they just keep going. They just keep doing it. It's like hit the head against the wall. I think most of the billionaires out there, these people who we lionize as incredible, how do these people become so successful? They can't feel it. That's how. They're just trying to feel their life. They're trying to have some satisfaction. And internally, they're just driven that I gotta get more so I can feel something. I can get some relief. Brothers, sisters, I know what you feel, but we can't just keep doing the same thing over and over. That is madness. So there I am. I have exactly what I want, and it's a tragedy, just like Oscar Wilde said. I want to tell a story that I think shows to me that these two tragedies are really the same thing. They're two versions of the same problem. About a year ago, I go on this crazy hike, the Boulder Skyline Traverse, and I'm talking to all these people. And we climbed 5 mountains over the course of the day. It's this long day. We start at like 4 a.m. And midway through, the guy who organizes this hike, he stops, he says, wait. I want to tell you guys how growth works. Like, this is what I see. And he does this cool thing where he stands, we're all gathered around him, and we're up on this mountain. And he takes a stick and he draws a circle around himself. And he says, here I am, here's my comfort zone. I'm standing in the middle of the circle. I'm afraid of what's out there. And he points the stick and he's like, I'm afraid of stepping outside the circle. And he steps outside the circle and he's like, And he stands there for a minute. He's like, okay, I can do it. I can be outside the circle. And he draws another circle around the smaller circle. And now he's standing inside the second circle. And he's like, this is how we grow. This is it. Step outside the circle to a bigger circle. Now our comfort zone is bigger. There's something wrong with this picture. What he's saying is true, but it's the first tragedy. That recipe is expand. And I spent more than 20 years doing this. Oh, I'm terrified that I'm going to be stuck with my parents. They've never gone to college. They're afraid of the world. The way they think about the world is that it's threatening and hard and difficult, and be suspicious of it, and don't try too much, and don't have big dreams. So I was allergic to that. And I just said, no, I will step outside the circle. I will step outside my parents' world. And I did it over and over again. Getting into college, getting my first job in DC, taking risks with that job, getting promoted, figuring out how to start my first business. Then how do I get to Silicon Valley? Oh my God, that was terrifying. I felt like such a fish out of water. I was this liberal arts kid working for this startup, my first job in Silicon Valley, with all these brilliant young engineers around me, and I just felt like a fool. So I just kept stepping outside, bigger circle, bigger circle. But there's a part of me that's never left the first circle. He is like, arms crossed, no, I am not going. You can go as far out there as you want. I am back here, and this is where I'm staying. It is not safe out there. And this part of me is pulling me back every single step. It never gets comfortable. It never gets comfortable. So I'm out there in these bigger and bigger circles, feeling like, holy shit, look at me. I just sold my company. I'm this poor kid from Podunkville with a dad who sold used cars and copiers. And I've done this. My imposter syndrome builds every time I step outside, and I can't beat it. So there's a missing piece from this way that I think many coaches, many motivational speakers, they have the best intentions, but there's this missing piece. And that's what I want to talk about. What's missing is the internal experience of how am I stepping outside into bigger circles so that I do not leave myself behind, and so that that part that's left behind, that is afraid and angry and frustrated that I am constantly pushing my body and my mind to go bigger, go bigger. It's like, when do I get a fucking break? And that part that I hated and resented, I was like, I don't want to be the young, scared kid that still lives inside me. I don't want that. I want to cut him out. That part, the part that's pulling me back, that's making the stepping out hard because of his resistance, that part is the part that can feel. The doer that I trained so well, all he can do is achieve, is make it happen. He can't feel it. He can't appreciate it. And the only way to bring what I call now the observer, this part that wants to feel, wants to experience, bring the observer into the events, into the participant, this part that's stepping out. I want a bigger life. But he can't feel it. He can only do the actions, but he misses all the experiences. To bring these two together and learn to do and to feel. I wanted that my whole life. And that was the terror. That was the terror that I felt when 7 years ago I sold the company and I realized all I can do is do and achieve and achieve. And I'm like a child pressed up against the window of my own life. And I can't get inside. I can't feel it. It's the worst tragedy. And of course you're going to try to upend your life. Of course I had to throw everything out. It wasn't that the job was such a problem, my work was such a problem, my marriage was such a problem. It was that I had to learn to rewire my entire way of being and showing up and acting and feeling. It's like rewiring a house. You gotta rip out the walls. It's fucking messy. And you don't have a place to live. All the identities are these walls. You can think of them as like, every identity is like a role that I'm used to playing. I'm a founder, I'm a husband, I'm a achiever, I'm a learner, I'm a growth mindset guy. I have a growth mindset. And I had to stop. I had to give up goals. No goals. That year and a half I lived in the cabin, no goals, no outcomes, no metrics. It's not that those things are wrong or that they're always bad. It's that they do not have the capacity to give me the feeling of my own life. And I think in the modern world, in the West, as men, we struggle to feel. We're emotionally unavailable. I was. I couldn't cry. I couldn't feel. I was like, all I could do is look at things and slice them up and try to fix them. That was everything I knew about how to live. I want to read you a poem from Maria Rilke, one of my favorite poets. This poem is called The Panther. And this is the modern life. This was my life. This was my problem. And even if you can't identify with my story, or maybe I'm making no sense, this poem, I think, is the feeling that I had, why I was so terrified and why I had to hit complete reset. Not voluntarily. My body did it. It just happened. And I was like, what the hell is going on? This is what was going on. The Panther. His vision from the constantly passing bars has grown so weary that it cannot hold anything else. It seems to him there are 1,000 bars, and behind the bars, no world. As he paces in cramped circles over and over, the movement of his powerful, soft strides is like a ritual dance around a center in which a mighty will stands paralyzed. Only at times, the curtain of the pupils lifts quietly. An image enters in, rushes down through the tensed, arrested muscles, plunges into the heart, and is gone. How many times have I felt that? 1,000 bars, and behind the bars, no world. But the image that comes in is the aliveness. It still comes in. And if I am not prepared to meet it, all it can do is what happened in that poem. It can rush down and encounters the bracing. Oh, I'm gonna step outside the circle again. I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna do it again. But it cannot be felt. It cannot come alive. And what does a panther want to do? A panther wants to prowl. That mighty will wants to get out into the world. I think other men are struggling to feel their own lives. I feel it when I talk to other men, this midlife crisis that we judge and criticize. And every time a midlife crisis pops up in one of our lives, we try to put the panther back in the cage. This is what happened with a friend of mine. His life starts to unravel just like mine did. His marriage, his work, his motivation leaves. And all my friends are like, put Humpty Dumpty back together and put him back where he was. And we want to put ourselves back in the cage. That's not the way. There's a much more subtle way of meeting this expansion that wants to happen. The stepping outside the circle wants to happen. But it can't happen the way that our ego wants to make it happen. We can do the actions, but the meaning will leave us and we'll be stuck with Oscar Wilde's two tragedies. Either be fighting for what we want or getting what we want, and we got nowhere to go. And that is a terror like nothing else I've ever known. And the only antidote to that terror is to realize that what I want is to feel my own life. I don't need the situation to be bigger and better and different. I need to learn to feel. It sounds trivial, like, oh, just feel your life. But I'm going to do a deep dive, and I'm going to show you, if you think it's trivial, and many spiritual teachers and therapists, pop psychologists are like, just be authentic. It was impossible for me to do that. I was so trapped in my identities and my habits. My mind would not allow me to acknowledge what I really felt, because that would unleash my instincts, my shadow. It would unleash. To feel is a deeply dangerous and subversive activity that usually will pit us, will pit me against, at first at least, against those we love, against those who we want to cooperate with, against those who are used to experiencing us in a certain way. And to be honest about our feelings is a terror at first, and they will come out screwy and sideways and destructive, and life will get harder before it gets easier. That's what this series is about. That's what I want to talk about. In my next episode, my next talk, I am going to tell a story. The most disastrous job that I ever took, about a year after I went into this whole tailspin, my life started coming apart. And I thought, I've got to put it back together again. I got to get a big job. And I did. I took a job that was huge, and it was a disaster. And I'm going to tell you about it. And I'm going to tell that story of that job with a myth that I think is such a perfect way of understanding why it's hard to do this work. What is subtle about it? What's difficult about it? Why can't we just face our fears and charge? What happens? We freeze and we turn to stone, and we can't feel. Even if we're the perfect shape that we always imagine, we can't feel. So that's a little preview. Maybe you can guess what myth I'm going to tell for my next episode. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to Life Beneath, where I excavate all the life that's down there, that's inside, but that hasn't come out yet. There's nothing more beautiful.